a few minutes, which says, following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended.
5 minutes ago, Prince William and Princess Anne delivered the announcement the palace had fought desperately to avoid. Their expressions were controlled, but their words carried a devastating truth. Princess Catherine had suffered a serious setback during her recovery, forcing doctors to place her under urgent observation and suspend every royal commitment indefinitely. William spoke as a husband struggling to remain composed. Anne stood beside him because this was no ordinary health statement. It was a warning that everything had changed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William tightened his grip on the lectern inside Windsor Castle and forced himself to continue. The castle, one of the monarchy's principal residences, had hosted announcements, but this one carried weight because it concerned the woman expected to stand beside the future king. Anne watched closely, her silence offering support without taking away his control. The prince confirmed that Catherine's condition had worsened suddenly, requiring urgent hospital observation and an indefinite withdrawal from every royal duty. The words landed hard. William paused after saying his wife's name, and for several seconds, nothing followed. Anne moved one hand beside his notes, close enough to steady him if his voice failed. She did not touch him. She did not need to. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, understood that her nephew was speaking as both heir and husband, and those roles were pulling him in opposite directions. Catherine had wanted to return slowly. She believed one managed appearance could reassure the public and reduce the pressure on William. He had argued against it, but the princess feared another cancellation would be seen as weakness. That fear now tormented him. The future king knew she had pushed herself partly to protect him, and he could not escape the thought that his burden had become hers. Anne confirmed through the prepared palace statement that doctors had raised concerns several days earlier. Catherine believed the symptoms would pass with rest, yet the warning signs had intensified. Her aunt's presence now carried meaning. The king had asked Anne to coordinate the family response, giving her control over schedules, communications, and the decisions that would follow. William left without taking questions. Anne remained for one final breath, staring ahead, as though she knew the public had heard only the safest version of the truth. To understand why William looked so broken, and why Anne stood like a shield beside him, the story must move beyond the statement, and into the private fears of the people now holding Catherine's future in their hands. Behind the formal titles were three people confronting a deeply human terror. Catherine was no longer simply the Princess of Wales preparing for a royal return. She was a wife fearing what her illness was doing to her husband, a mother worrying about her children, and a future queen watching her carefully rebuilt strength disappear. William was caught between duty and devotion. Anne understood both, and knew that the monarchy would demand decisions before the family had time to grieve. Catherine barely mentioned the cancelled ceremonies. Her first question was about Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. She looked directly at William and asked whether the children had seen the medical team arrive. He told her they had noticed the cars, but had not been given frightening details. The answer offered little comfort. The princess knew that children sensed silence, closed doors, and unfinished explanations long before adults believed they did. William had spent months moving between state briefings and his wife's bedside. State briefings were private meetings where senior royals received updates on government and national affairs, responsibilities the future king could not simply abandon. Yet every time an official mentioned schedules, speeches, or public appearances, his patience grew thinner. Anne had watched that change closely. She saw a man trying to serve the crown while fearing that duty was stealing time from the woman he loved. Catherine lowered her eyes and admitted that stepping back again felt like failure. She believed the public had waited patiently, and she hated the idea of disappointing them once more. William told her that recovery was not failure and survival was not weakness. His voice remained gentle until she suggested one carefully controlled appearance. Then it hardened. He refused to discuss it. Anne understood Catherine's instinct because it reminded her of Queen Elizabeth II, who had often placed duty above exhaustion. The Princess Royal respected that strength, but she also remembered its cost. She told Catherine that endurance could inspire a nation, yet ignoring danger could leave a family carrying consequences no ceremony could repair. Catherine removed her engagement ring before the medical examination and placed it in William's palm. He closed his fingers around it without speaking. The ring had once represented their future. In that moment, it felt like a promise he was terrified he might not be able to protect. Anne entered quietly and immediately noticed the folded medical summary inside his jacket. William later admitted during a private conversation with his aunt that he had read the complete assessment. Catherine had received only the explanation her doctors believed she was ready to absorb. The full report offered no clear return date. Recovery might take months, not weeks. Catherine soon noticed their careful answers. Then she asked why everyone kept avoiding one date, the day of the private Windsor rehearsal. That rehearsal had seemed unimportant at the time, but one frightening moment inside Windsor Castle had already exposed the danger everyone was trying not to name. The crisis did not begin with the announcement. It began several days earlier, behind closed doors at Windsor, when Catherine tried to prove that she was ready to return. The gathering was meant to be a simple rehearsal, 20 minutes of standing, speaking, and walking through a future ceremony. Instead, it became the moment William would replay in his mind again and again. One unsteady breath, one dropped folder, and one terrible realization changed the family's plans forever. Catherine had requested the private rehearsal herself. She wanted to test her strength before agreeing to a small summer engagement, knowing that one successful appearance could reassure the public and calm growing concern. A royal engagement is an official duty carried out on behalf of the crown, but to her, this one meant far more. It represented proof that illness had not taken control of her future. William opposed the plan from the beginning. He believed recovery should be measured by doctors, not by applause or duty. Catherine persuaded him that a controlled trial would remove uncertainty, and Anne agreed to attend because the princess trusted her honesty. The older royal would not flatter her, and she would not allow fear to make every decision. Catherine finished the short practice speech and took one step back. Then her breathing changed. The folder slipped from her hand as she reached for a chair, but her fingers missed the edge. William caught her before she struck the floor. For one terrible second, he held her weight completely, unable to tell whether she could hear him calling her name. Catherine recovered enough to protest. She insisted she had stood too quickly and demanded that the rehearsal continue. William pushed the chair aside and told everyone the engagement was over before it had begun. His voice carried anger, but the fury was only fear stripped of its disguise. Anne later confronted Catherine in private. She warned that courage could become self-destruction when the body was begging for help. Catherine answered that every absence placed more pressure on William, forcing him to carry family duty and the future of the monarchy at once. The confession silenced them both. A physician entered with a portable monitor while Catherine sat without speaking. The doctor checked the first reading, paused, and repeated it. Then he asked everyone except William to leave. The medical assessment, a formal record of her condition and treatment needs, showed that her recovery had become far more fragile than earlier examinations suggested. Catherine asked William to keep the incident private until the doctors knew more. He agreed. Anne warned him that silence would become dangerous if palace planners continued preparing for her return. The following morning, Catherine's appearance still remained on the official schedule. William stared at the entry and understood that someone had ignored the medical decision. What began as fear beside Catherine's chair was about to become anger across a palace table. as William faced those who still believed the future queen should keep moving at any cost. Prince William entered the private meeting, carrying no prepared speech and no intention of negotiating. Catherine's name remained on the schedule despite the Windsor incident, and palace officials were still discussing how quickly she could reappear. Anne understood his anger before he said a word. Catherine, however, had asked to attend the confrontation herself. What followed was not a debate about protocol. It was a painful collision between a woman determined to serve and a husband terrified of losing her. William placed the working schedule on the table and demanded that every appearance carrying Catherine's name be removed. A working schedule is the internal palace plan used to organize royal duties before they are announced to the public. Senior household planners argued that her return could be shortened, seated, and carefully controlled. They feared more cancellations would weaken public confidence at a time when several senior royals were already absent. Anne refused to entertain the argument. She told the room that medical instructions were not suggestions, and no ceremony carried greater authority than the doctors protecting Catherine's recovery. William backed her immediately. His voice stayed controlled, but every word carried the memory of catching his wife before she hit the floor. Catherine entered without warning. She asked why decisions about her life were being made as though she had lost the right to speak. William turned toward her in disbelief, furious that she had left her room and more frightened than he wanted anyone to see. The princess insisted that illness had already taken enough control from her. She would not surrender the rest willingly. William told Catherine that control did not mean ignoring danger. His anger finally broke when he admitted that, for one terrible moment at Windsor, he believed she was collapsing in his arms. The future king could face pressure from Parliament, the press, and the palace. He could not calmly face the thought of losing his wife because everyone had demanded one more appearance. Catherine stood across the table from him. No aide interrupted. No official dared speak. She said quietly, "I am still here." William pushed the schedule away and answered, "Then let me keep you here." Anne then revealed what she had found in the documented medical correspondence. Doctors had sent a written warning before the rehearsal, advising Catherine against prolonged standing, but the message never reached either of them. The Princess Royal ordered the original communication trail secured, meaning every email, note, and internal instruction connected to the warning would be preserved for review. William demanded the name of whoever had delayed it. Catherine agreed to cancel the appearance, but only after he promised she would be consulted before any future statement about her condition. Her duties had now been stopped, but the more dangerous question remained. Who possessed the power to decide what happened next, and who had already used that power without the family's knowledge? Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. It moves through calendars, signatures, sealed instructions, and decisions made before the people affected even enter the room. Catherine's setback exposed that machinery at its coldest. William was her husband, but he could not govern medical care alone. Anne possessed authority, but not final control. King Charles remained the sovereign, yet he was facing his own limitations. Behind one locked door, the family had to decide whose command would now prevail. Charles entered the restricted family council, looking more tired than anyone expected. A family council is a private royal meeting used to settle serious household decisions away from public view. The king had been warned to conserve his strength, but he refused to stay away while Catherine's future, William's duties, and the monarchy's working structure were being rewritten. Anne spoke first. She argued that Catherine's medical team must hold absolute authority over any return, with no courtier, advisor, or public expectation allowed to weaken that decision. William supported her immediately. The prince would reduce his own engagements, remain close to his wife, and reject every timetable built around appearances rather than recovery. Charles understood the human need, but he also saw the danger to the institution. With Catherine absent and William stepping back, Major duties would fall on fewer working royals. The king feared instability, public doubt, and a growing sense that the crown could no longer maintain its commitments. William heard every concern, yet he refused to let his wife become the answer to an institutional problem. Anne turned directly toward her brother. She reminded Charles that the crown survives only when the family beneath it is not destroyed. Her words carried the memory of Queen Elizabeth II, who had served through exhaustion, grief, and private pain. The monarch lowered his eyes. He knew his sister was not attacking their mother's devotion. She was warning him not to repeat its cost. Charles later read the delayed medical warning alone. He removed his glasses and placed the page face down. The documented account showed that a palace official had delayed the message to prevent what was described as premature disruption to the royal calendar, while a second opinion was sought. No one had intended harm, but someone had knowingly placed scheduling above urgency. The king made his decision. He authorized Anne to oversee every operational matter connected to Catherine's recovery. William would control family decisions, while the doctors alone would determine when public duties could resume. Charles signed an emergency restructuring order, a temporary command changing how royal responsibilities would be managed during the crisis. Then he handed the pen to William instead of an aide. The gesture said what words could not. The future king was no longer being protected from authority. He was being prepared to carry it. The signatures settled the question of control, but they could not soften the human cost, and beyond the council room, the first shockwaves were already reaching Catherine's family. By afternoon, Catherine's name had disappeared from the royal calendar. Events planned for months were cancelled in minutes. Staff members received new instructions. William's appearances were reduced. Anne's schedule expanded. Yet the most painful consequence did not appear on any official page. Inside the family apartments, 3 children were told that their mother would not be returning to public life as soon as they had hoped. It was there, far from the machinery of monarchy, that the tragedy became painfully real. Anne accepted several of Catherine's charitable and ceremonial commitments without hesitation. Charitable engagements are official visits, supporting causes linked to the royal family, and many had been planned around the princess's gradual return. The Princess Royal now carried those duties, so William could remain close to home. He withdrew from every event requiring long travel, refusing to be hours away if Catherine's condition changed again. Palace staff moved quickly. Speeches were withdrawn, transport plans were cancelled, and wardrobe preparations stopped. Boxes prepared for future appearances were sealed and returned to storage. Catherine watched each event vanish from a private schedule. She tried to remain calm, but every removed date felt like another part of her life being taken away without permission. William faced the conversation he had feared most. He sat with Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, and chose words that would not terrify them. Their mother needed more time, stronger treatment, and careful observation before life could feel normal again. The prince spoke gently, yet the children understood enough to hear what he was not saying. Charlotte asked the question that broke his composure. She wanted to know whether Catherine had become worse because she tried to complete the Windsor rehearsal. William froze. Then he knelt beside his daughter and told her none of this was her mother's fault. He repeated it slowly, knowing the words were meant for all 3 children, and perhaps for himself. Catherine heard them from the doorway. She stepped forward and gathered George, Charlotte, and Louis into her arms. The princess promised she was not disappearing from their lives, even if she had to disappear from public view. William looked away for a moment, unable to hide how deeply the promise affected him. Later, a documented medical update confirmed that Catherine's new treatment and observation period could last several months. The prognosis remained hopeful, but the doctors could offer no reliable return date. Anne then discovered private letters Catherine had drafted for several charities before the setback. Their careful wording suggested the princess had feared a long absence before anyone else accepted it. That evening, Catherine asked William to dismiss the aides and sit with her alone. She had made a decision not about returning, but about how she intended to live through what came next. After a day ruled by doctors, calendars, and painful explanations, the decisive shift would come from Catherine herself, during one private conversation with the man who had been trying to protect her from every possible loss. When the doors closed and the aides were gone, Catherine no longer spoke as a princess addressing the future king. She spoke as a wife who had watched fear take control of her family. William expected her to challenge the cancellations again. Instead, she asked him to stop treating every difficult conversation as though it might break her. Her health had changed their lives, but she refused to let illness become the only story their children or the nation remembered about her. Catherine sat with William after George, Charlotte, and Louis had gone to bed. No doctors stood nearby. No advisors shaped the conversation. The silence between them felt heavier, because nothing official remained to hide behind. The prince admitted that since the Windsor collapse, he had measured every sentence and watched every movement, terrified that another crisis might come without warning. William told her that fear had become instinct. He noticed every pause, every tired breath, every moment she reached for support. Catherine listened, then said the truth he did not want to hear. His protection had begun to make her feel less like his wife, and more like someone under guard. The words wounded him, but he could not deny them. Catherine reminded him that love could become another kind of prison when fear controlled every choice. William finally confessed that catching her at Windsor had broken something inside him. In that moment, the future king had lost confidence that he could protect both his family and the monarchy. He could carry duty. He could face criticism, but he could not command uncertainty. William lowered his voice and admitted that he had been trying to prevent every possible pain. Catherine answered that protection did not always mean stopping pain before it arrived. Sometimes it meant staying beside someone while they endured it. She needed a husband who trusted her strength, not a guard who expected her to break. Catherine reached for the engagement ring he had carried since the medical examination. She placed it back on her finger and held his hand. Then she said, "Do not turn my illness into my ending." William lowered his head against her hand and finally allowed himself to cry. Catherine then revealed through the recovery plan prepared with her medical team that she had already chosen a different path forward. The plan included no public appearances, but it allowed private charitable work when her strength permitted. She also asked Anne to become her public representative, carrying messages to organizations without pretending the princess was ready to return. William agreed to stop promising dates and fighting uncertainty. Together, they prepared a new statement focused on recovery, family, and honesty, rather than schedules. For the first time since the crisis began, Catherine had reclaimed her voice, and when that voice reached the public, grief gave way to a wave of solidarity the palace had not expected. The announcement moved beyond palace walls within minutes. Television programming was interrupted. Newspaper presses changed their front pages. Across Britain, the language of royal duty gave way to something far simpler: concern for a woman, a husband, and 3 children facing an uncertain recovery. Yet the defining public response was not found inside a studio or editorial office. It appeared outside Kensington Palace, where strangers gathered in silence beneath Catherine's darkened windows. Catherine's personal message confirmed that her recovery had suffered a serious setback, and that she would follow medical advice without setting a return date. Kensington Palace, the London residence and office linked to the Prince and Princess of Wales, released the statement in her own words. That mattered because the public was no longer hearing only from advisors. They were hearing from the woman at the center of the crisis. William and Anne received praise for standing together during the first announcement. Commentators described the Princess Royal as a symbol of continuity, while the prince's visible emotion showed the personal cost behind the formal language. Yet admiration quickly mixed with anger when the delayed medical warning became known. Critics asked whether the palace had protected Catherine soon enough. Others turned the question toward the public itself, arguing that endless demands for appearances had helped create the pressure she felt to prove she was recovering. William saw headlines treating his wife as a constitutional problem, rather than a human being. Anne urged him not to answer anger with anger. Compassion, she reminded him, was speaking louder than blame. By evening, a quiet crowd had gathered at the gates of Kensington Palace. Families placed white flowers along the railings. One handwritten sign carried 6 simple words: "Your health is your duty now." At 8 o'clock, the crowd fell silent without instruction. No speech began it. No official organized it. The silence rose naturally from strangers who understood that there was nothing left to demand. A national broadcaster opened its evening program with Catherine's photograph beside an empty royal calendar. The presenter explained that the absence of a return date was not a palace failure, but an honest recognition of uncertainty. Hours later, a leading newspaper printed only her message beneath the words, "Take all the time you need." Catherine watched a short recording of the crowd from her private room. She pressed one hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the tenderness of people she had feared disappointing. William sat beside her as she asked him to send a message of thanks before the flowers were removed. The public had delivered its verdict. Now Charles, Anne, William, and Catherine had to decide what that verdict demanded from the monarchy itself. The nation had released Catherine from the pressure to return quickly. Now the royal family had to release itself from the belief that sacrifice was the only proof of service. The tragedy of Catherine's setback was not that a princess had vanished from the royal calendar. It was that a woman had nearly convinced herself that duty required her to ignore fear, exhaustion, and pain. William's announcement exposed the danger. Anne's intervention stopped the machinery from moving forward. Charles' decision gave recovery priority over ceremony. But Catherine delivered the final verdict herself. She would not surrender her future to illness, and she would no longer prove her worth by pretending she was unbreakable. Charles gathered William, Anne, and Catherine for one final private meeting. No one discussed return dates. The king understood that the deeper issue was no longer one appearance or one failed warning. It was the culture surrounding royal duty itself. For years, sacrifice had been treated as proof of loyalty. Now that belief had nearly caused permanent damage. Charles confirmed that no member of the family would ever again be expected to resume duties against medical advice. A medical protection protocol, meaning a permanent system that sends health warnings directly to senior family members without palace delay, would now become part of the royal household. Rank would not matter. Public pressure would not matter. Ceremony would not matter. The king then apologized to Catherine. He admitted that an institution built on endurance had made rest feel like failure. She listened without interrupting, and told him that change mattered more than guilt. Charles lowered his head, knowing forgiveness did not erase what had happened, but it could still shape what came next. Anne promised to carry Catherine's public responsibilities without allowing anyone to describe her absence as weakness. William thanked his aunt for protecting his wife when fear had left him unable to think beyond the next hour. The Princess Royal accepted his words quietly, reminding him that loyalty sometimes meant stopping the crown rather than serving its momentum. Catherine rose slowly and walked toward the window without assistance. William moved instinctively, ready to steady her, then stopped when she turned and smiled. In that small moment, he finally understood. Supporting her did not mean taking away every risk. It meant staying close while respecting her strength. The delayed warning changed palace procedure forever. Catherine's indefinite withdrawal remained in place, but her private charitable work continued on her own terms. Her value would no longer be measured by balcony appearances, speeches, or completed engagements. William and Anne's tragic announcement became a turning point, not an ending. The monarchy chose humanity over appearance, honesty over silence, and recovery over relentless performance. Catherine did not emerge defeated. She emerged as the woman who changed what royal strength meant. The palace announcement began with fear, but it ended with a lasting truth. Catherine's greatest act of duty was not returning before she was ready. It was giving herself permission to heal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.